Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Tough act to follow, Angela. That was a ton of great advice I wish I had when I was applying to medical school. Um, I kind of don't remember exactly how many I applied to also because it was a while ago, but I think it was somewhere around 40 to 50. I don't even know if I could call that over applying for me because my MCAT was probably around average, and I would say maybe a little above average. And then my GPA, well, specifically my science GPA was like, if I put that into like MSAR, it like didn't show up. It was pretty bad. Like I said, just well, I don't need to explain my undergrad career because I'm not applying to med school right now, but basically, there's just like a lot of other elements to my application, I think, that definitely helped. And it's really funny just kind of seeing all of like life's little coincidences because I actually didn't even apply to Rush Medical College in my first batch. I hadn't really heard of it as I'd never been in the Midwest before at that point. I was like, I grew up on the West Coast and then I went to school and worked on the East Coast. But I was in Chicago for a meeting as a research coordinator for one of the trials that I was working on. And like one of the people I randomly talked to who was like some device rep of the company, we were just like talking over dinner and he was like, oh, like you talk a lot about kind of the uh, health care accessibility issues and like working with the community and stuff, you should apply to Rush. So just kind of like definitely keep a open mind. So yeah, so I applied to it actually, I think in like September or something, way after kind of all the first primaries are usually sent out. Yeah, so apply very broadly in terms of if you can apply broadly geographically. I know that's not necessarily realistic for everyone, but at least definitely apply very broadly in terms of what the official ranking or reputations are, because one of the reasons why I love Rush so much and why I decided to go to Rush was like even though it's not really like on any rankings in terms of like a research or academically strong school kind of list. Like I remember talking to some of the doctors I worked with about where I was interviewing stuff, and they said, "Oh, Rush, like we know some Rush grads, and like they're always just like so on top of it clinically. Like they're always so good with their patients." And I was like, "That's a pretty good reputation to have coming out of that school." In terms of other random advice, I think Angela really covered a ton of really great stuff, and so did Allison. Um, I guess what I can offer is this. Maybe it's like I said, I wanted to be a writer before, and I guess part of that's still part of my DNA. But I feel like I get pretty good feedback on the interview trail on my personal statements. And I would say that I think what makes them work well is don't just kind of like spout random adjectives or random platitudes of why you want to be a doctor. Like everyone can say that they want to help people, that they're interested in even like the buzzwords of, oh, a lifelong learning. Like everyone can say that. Tell specific stories or experiences that you've had, tell a specific event. Um, to really make you stand out. Like it might be literally like, a very similar story to something that someone else has, but putting names down, even if they're initials, because you don't want to violate patient privacy or anything, or like talking about an experience you had like on a team or something, um, really does make you into a real person for them. Like no matter what you write, it's going to be a cliche, honestly, because they're getting like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applications every year. But it's better than offering absolutely nothing personal to you.
Right.
Okay. Really great points from everybody. Wow. I'm just trying to think of anything else I can add in at this point. I I'm kind of on the other side of the application side of things. I only applied to 9 schools. And again, it's because for me, I knew where I wanted to go in terms of like location. I was really focused on location as a driving factor, partly because I was also in a relationship and my partner had said, you can choose these cities and that's it. And so Um, Interestingly enough, a lot of those cities correlated to schools that were, well regarded. And so during that process, I told myself, you have to work extra hard. You know, I didn't get into Harvard, but I applied to Harvard because I said, you know what, aim for Harvard, and then anything below that you're going to be happy about. If long as so, my advice is like, I'm not saying Harvard's the best school, but under a lot of different systems of ranking that exist, it's a pretty high up there one. So I would say just honestly do your best, aim your highest, because like everyone said, it's a really random process. I don't understand how it works. Um, let's see, in terms of recommendations, be authentic. I think that's the best thing you can do. If you people, they see so many people, this is their job. Every year they go through and look at applications and they talk to people. They'll know if you're not being authentic. So you really have to know why you want to become a doctor. For myself, it's not even that I really want to necessarily practice medicine in the traditional sense. I'm really interested in policy work. So having to tell people that story and then telling that to doctors and them asking me, well, why do you want to go and get an MD? And being able to answer that question, it's hard to do sometimes. And so one thing I can also bridge onto that is talk to people before your interviews. Like practice telling your story, practice putting into words, hearing what people have to say about your story, because it gives you a new way of thinking about and delivering your message that can be really powerful. I I think be prepared to go through multiple iterations of your application, and that's okay. The first time you just have to get words on the page, and then you can start making edits and changes as you go. I had multiple people read over my application, and I had at least 3 major revisions, like where I would start brand new. Um, and I'll say the way that I kind of wrote my story for my personal statement is, since I had such a pretty blatantly strong like research background, I wrote the story about how there had been various data points in my life that I had reflected upon and sort of led me to make this correlation that medicine was my career choice. And I talked about the different data points. And I didn't necessarily want science to be the focus of my storytelling, but I thought having that as sort of a backdrop into the broader picture of social justice and how these different incidences in my life led to that and correlated together was a good way of telling the story. And I didn't have that the first time I wrote the essay. So you really have to sit with it, let it sit for a week, come back to it, and go through it again. Um, Maybe if you can go through practice MMIs. I know those are a big thing right now with interview. I hated the MMIs. Those are mini multiple interviews or something where they do like
Yeah.
8 minutes in a room and you're talking to somebody about who knows what.
Yep.
Uh, get practice like cold doing those. Like don't get the prompt, but like somebody asks you the question, you get a minute to think about it and prep, and then you go into it. Just because you have to train your brain to be in the scenario, right? Again, so just like you train to take the MCAT, I spent the 2 months before taking the test. I would spend every Saturday doing a practice test because I had to physically get my body prepared to sit down for a 7.5 hour test. Just like when I'm going into these interviews, I have to be able to prep my brain to work in this manner. So you know what you have to do. You know what's going to come. Take the time to prep yourself to be the most successful you can be for it. And I'll say I only got into one school. I had a few interviews, but I only got into one school. So I'm super happy about UCSF. Go somewhere. Every school has mission statements. Read those mission statements. They have those mission statements for a reason. Some schools are really about like genetic studies. Some schools are really about clinical practice. Some schools are really about research. I know Stanford has research 3 times in its mission statement. That's not a misnomer. That's there for a reason. So think about that. Don't just like apply for the sake of applying. Think about, what is this school really trying to tell you? And does that match your values? Does that match your goals? Yeah.